tell me when.
Yep, go.
So, welcome to another STARTS event for ARS Electronica 2020. This is a STARTS ecosystem pop-up event, and it's promoted by the STARTS Ecosystem Consortium, who manage the STARTS EU website and the STARTS community. I'm Camille Baker. I'm the co-organizer of the UK Garden of Earthly Delights, which this was a part of, and of course a partner in the STARTS ecosystem. I'm from the University of the Creative Arts, UK, and professor of interactive and immersive arts. So welcome everyone. This session is called Understanding Complex Data in COVID Times. And fashion materializing numbers is this afternoon, or sorry, after this session. For this morning's session, we have speakers Mike Phillips from IDAT, Paolo Sirio, who's an artist and a STARTS Prize winner, Tiga Brain, hope I said that correctly, Tiga, or Tega, Joshua Cordway with Deep Autogenia, and the company, I believe, or the collaboration is Autogenia and Cordway. And we have also Jacob Skinner from Thrive Wearables joining us as well. So I'm just going to go through introducing everyone as they speak. So we're going to start with Mike Phillips. And Mike Phillips is a professor of interdisciplinary arts at the University of Plymouth, the director of IDAT.org, an open research lab for playful experimentation with creative technology. And he's going to give his take on what we're calling materializing data. Take it away, Mike.
Okay, thank you. Just share my screen. Here we go. Cool, thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me to take part in this event. I'm going to be talking about data behaviors or bad data behaviors and the sort of relationship between the data that we harvest, analyze and visualize and human behavior, which of course is a recursive process. And so I'm going to talk about some of the work that I've been doing in this area and also reference people like Roy Ascott. But I thought I'd start with, not with a COVID related thing, although weirdly it is, and that is to do with the way that the measurement of data has changed the creation of art. And this, I'm sure, is not just something that's happening in the UK. It's fundamentally part of the way that we try and justify all the public expenditure on culture. And in the UK, as you can see here, there was a mantra created by the Arts Council in sort of 10 years ago now, which was to create great art and culture for everyone. And of course, that was coupled with this idea of how do you measure the quality and spend on this. And so what they started to do was projects like this, which we've had some entanglement with, which is to deal with the quality metrics or cultural value. And so, you know, in order that you can put a price tag on it. And of course, the problem with this is that it has subtly changed, well, not subtly, I think it has fundamentally changed the nature of art production in the UK. And if it hasn't happened where you are yet, I'm sure it will be on its way soon. And that is the idea that the way that you measure something starts then to shape the thing that you're measuring. In the UK, this became instrumental in measuring actually low-hanging fruit, easy things to measure, which are things like audience numbers. So the great art for everyone meant that the more people who attended the event, the easier it was to count them, and that number equated to value. Therefore, an awful lot of money has been spent on large-scale events, possibly, you know, at the deficit of thinking about the inherent or intrinsic quality of art itself. We've been playing with this since we had a Nesta grant a few years ago, working with Cheltenham festivals and also the city of Plymouth to look at what those quality metrics might be, or how do you actually measure cultural value? And it fundamentally isn't in a social or economic way, but how do you actually measure that intrinsic value embedded in cultural activity. So these technologies we were using for harvesting data from audiences was playful and experimental and participatory. That was the key kind of thing, that the behaviors of audiences at an event or in a city or a gallery or in the viewing and consumption of art was a participatory process, and therefore it was their activity that changed it, not the measurement of their behavior that changed it. And the work that I'm going to be talking through here kind of looks at this process, which I think was really very effectively captured by Roy Ascott back in '68 here with this manifesto quote. When art is a form of behavior, it predominates over hardware in the creative sphere. Process replaces product in importance. And I think this process is fundamental to the way that we work with data. And if you think about how our art schools actually do not really deal with data as a material, maybe within interaction design or graphic comms where it's about visualization, etc. But fundamentally, as a material, our art schools are still stuck with the product and not the process when it comes to data. So Roy's work back in the 60s, here you can see Brian Eno on the right and Roy on the left with these calibrators, were really interested in looking at the behavior as a material. And fundamentally linked to that is the data that those behaviors allow us to capture. You can see this very clearly in the work that he was doing in the 80s with networked art. I certainly had the pleasure of working with him on projects like Aspects of Gaia, I think 89 in Ars Electronica, where the qualities of the things that you were looking at, the conversations and the consumption of the artwork, were fundamentally linked to the data transmission, whether it was the compression, the codec, the data rate, the handshaking, the synchronous and asynchronous qualities of those data sets. And these qualities, I think, are things that are being looked at, by you and the contemporary audience that we're looking at. And some initiatives that have been involved in the Southwest. This is the Southwest Creative Technology Network, where we currently have a bunch of data fellows working on, from different perspectives, on the nature of quality, both the politics, the social quality of that, the cultural quality of it, and the technical quality of these things. But also in a project I'm involved in, which is the Environmental Futures and Big Data Impact Lab at Plymouth, where the Dome, which I'm going to talk about at the end, is a fundamental part of doing what Dr. Fish says here, which is the idea of, environmental processes need to be felt as much as they understood. So how do you create this kind of, love in this telematic embrace? We've been working on projects which have been about capturing that human behavior and turning it into an experience. And that participatory experience, when it is made transparent that this data process is underway, I think was very clearly demonstrated in the ARC-OS system that we created in Plymouth, and has also been installed in a building in Perth at Curtin University, where it's actually a kind of BIMS, building information management system, allowed us to capture real-time data from the inhabitants of the building. And rather than use this as an intelligent building system, it actually tried to make the inhabitants of the building more intelligent by allowing them to see their direct impact on the ecology of the space that they're occupying. So by creating works, for instance, the random lift button, which generated a random floor and therefore kind of made a disruptive intervention into your daily flow between floors of a building and the communities that might live on those floors, to the Sloth Bot, which was an incredibly slow-moving robot, effectively a large wall piece of the architecture that reconstructed the space as you would walk through it. This sort of fascination with buildings and the inhabitants has recently been played out in a project created by my long-standing colleague, Pete Arga. Emotios is an intelligent data collection system, but again, fundamentally participatory. It was embedded in in Plymouth School of Creative Arts here in Plymouth, and used a chatbot to harvest data from the kids in the school, and effectively building them into a process of understanding the way people feel in the school, the way their friends felt in the school, but also allowing the teachers to understand the kind of the vibe in the school, to look at safeguarding and to create dialogue through this Emotios system with those kids. So collecting data in real time from people and then allowing it to be played with and participated with is fundamental to the work that we're doing. This was an installation at the Tate Modern a few years ago. But again, which used this way of showing people what their data was doing and then allowing them to engage with it in a playful way. And of course, this creates an issue of speed and synchronicity and asynchronicity. And I suppose one of the fundamental problems we have with the way our behaviors are operating now in these COVID times is that the data we're getting is not actually real time at all. It's actually requiring us to be predictive about 2 weeks from now. And so to understand our behavior now and its impact on 2 weeks in the future, rather than understanding the world in real time, is a fundamental, mental issue that we have in understanding our world. Not least because of the work that Buckminster Fuller did and the idea of a real-time picturable space that would take place in an environment or in the dome environment. And just coming to the end of my presentation now, I think I've got a minute left. We have the full dome environment. This is a place I love. We have a small dome on Plymouth University, the IBT, which is a 9-meter dome. This is a dome from colleagues in the Angevant, who I believe Condition Pluriel are performing in a dome in Linz at the moment. And also SAT. And at the bottom here, we have the new dome that's going up in Plymouth, which is a 17-meter dome, inspired and very much based on the work that SAT in Montreal have been doing. These projects that we've been involved in, mainly through the EMDL project, European Mobile Dome Labs project, has been about harvesting data, not using lenses, but actually using data as a way of visualizing the world, and a world which might be transcalar. So here you can see some atomic force microscopy data, my MRI scan, all of which are embedded into an environment which, through the use of tools, IoT, Internet of Things type tools, we were able to capture audience interaction with those spaces, but also then to allow them to interact with that environment, to navigate it and to play with it. So the bad behaviors bit, I think, is important because Allegra Fuller at SAT in 2015, I think, said that literacy creates distance. And if you think about it, one of the biggest problems we have culturally is that there is a shocking understanding of the visual world by STEM subjects and statisticians and the like. But that is only equaled by the shocking illiteracy that the humanities and the arts have around data. So how do we engage with this stuff? How do we make this stuff playful and something that we can feel as much as we can understand? That's the work that we're trying to do here. And I think that is particularly important in these COVID times. I'll end there. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Mike. That was fantastic.
Thank you.
Okay. So keep your questions coming in. We're going to collect them on the YouTube channel and then bring them back at the end of the session and bring all the panels together to discuss together. So we'll move swiftly on to Paolo Cirio, who's from Italy. And Paolo has exhibited in museums, art institutions worldwide. He shows his research and intervention-based works through prints, installation, video, public art. Paolo works with legal, economic, and cultural systems of the information society. He investigates social fields impacted by the internet, such as privacy, democracy, finance, and intellectual property. His art embodies the contradictions, conflicts, and potentials inherent to the social complexity of information society through a critical and proactive approach. So welcome, Paolo, if you'd like to share, maybe give a wave to everyone and share your screen when you're ready.
Sure. Hi to everyone. I am Paolo Cirio, and I am mainly an artist, but also an activist. And the bio was pretty long and gives you a picture of what I do. And here I will just present a couple of projects and contextualize it in this time of crisis, where we definitely see more the power, the structural power taking shape and overcome, like being subject to them, even more with technology. And in particular, it's interesting to hear Mike talking about matrix and talking about quality of data. So I would like to keep talking about those metrics, but in terms of like quality of technology.
Can I ask you, Paolo, are you showing your screen?
Sure, I am going to share it.
Okay, great.
And about that, I would like to introduce this project that is Sociality, which is from 2018, which is a collection of patents that are about internet technology mainly, and mainly also about social media. So those are like patents, so inventions that have been submitted to the Patents Office from 2018 to 2008. So it's basically 20 years of information about inventions of internet and technology. So the huge amount of data is like 20,000 patents that I managed to collect through searching by keywords, classes of patents, and so on. And then I started to rate all this data, which is each record is a patent, is an invention, to find out which were the most invasive in terms of surveillance, manipulation, discrimination, addictions, and so on. All these things that we now are aware about when we use internet, but which wasn't the case for the past 20 years. And so most of these...
Sorry, Paolo, we can't see anything. Are we meant to see something?
Sure. Wait a second.
Apologies.
Are you sure you don't see anything? I see.
I don't see anything. Does anyone else see anything?
No, I can't see anything. Maybe if you make your bandwidth higher again.
What about now? Are you able to see something?
No, you might have to push up your bandwidth again, sadly.
It's showing that you are an icon that says you're sharing your desktop, but we don't see anything. I think maybe you turned your video off and never turned it back on again.
What about now?
No, sorry.
Well, it's fine. If you're fine with that,
now we see it. Now we see it. Yes. Now we see you.
It works only if we are together. Funny. Okay, so even better. Sorry about this. Anyway, here you can see some pictures of these patents that have been printed out as a single document, and they are installed in galleries and museums as big installations where people can see the magnitude of these kind of like grand plan to program humanity really, and control humanity really through the internet. So this project is also participatory. That's why Mike was reminding me what are the things about this project. So everyone can go to the website where there are the 20,000 patents and can basically flag the ones that they consider too dangerous for society, and eventually propose to ban some technology that are probably too dangerous to be even out there. So there is this participatory model, which is also a little bit utopic in a way, because of course, how many people are going to participate in this really, and how many people really understand this kind of technology and which are the danger of it. But at the same time, it brings up some questions concerning like the ethics of these of the technology, and so how information technology can be dangerous as much as chemicals or environmental things that can cause great damage to humanity, which is quite a new concept, especially for the most of the common people, if you want. So yes, this is definitely what shows us about the matrix and quality of data, but also quality of technology, which I think also artists have to think when they are creating new projects or new interfaces or algorithms, and which are the actual consequences of those. And that has to do also about information ecology, if you want, and so how more data is produced, and now more data is produced about our health, and so about our body, and so that's like really what we would call biometrics, that with the pandemic, of course, is incremental. And we still actually don't know how much of this data will be public. And if really will get public, let's say if we add the virus, the COVID virus or not, and if there will be something, data about it, about individual citizens, which is something most probable and probably is already there in some states, how do we control the data? How do we can have permission to remove the data? And that is something I explored also with the questions concerning reputation. And so there was this project that I've done in 2016 about the right to be forgotten, which is just about the right to remove data. So we always think data should be forever, but actually some data is that bad that it should be just removed. It doesn't really matter to lose information. It's actually a good thing. And this also became a huge campaign, or at least a huge effort for me to advocate for the right to be forgotten in the United States. In this case, the focus was really the criminal records that are public in United States. However, this became also something about cyberbullying, about the harassment of women online, and also about health data, which I suppose is going to be even bigger in the future once we start to have like body scanners that are available to everyone, and everyone can publish data about our health without our control. And so this is another example where we look at the quality of data, and eventually we even think that data is not useful, it's actually dangerous and should be removed. Something again that a few years ago was almost blasphemy for technologies like us. We all want more data, harvest more data, and that would have bring only more transparency, more good things. and in fact it's not the thing that we discover now. And so I think this has to do with what all of this has to do with art. Well, I think there is an aesthetics of information ethics, and has to do with really understanding how the perception of information, but also the representation of information, has to do with the aesthetics, because it is about deciding what is shown, what is not shown, what should be done and what shouldn't be done regarding information technology. And that, of course, has to do directly with aesthetics when artists like me are working with this sensitive information and these kind of subjects. The aesthetics of information ethics has a pretty wide range of scope. Let me start to zoom here. Meaning that really has to do with any technology and any issues concerning technology and society. So we talk about hate speech, but also legal accountability of algorithms. We talk about the targeting of voters, fake news, of course, be anonymous, but also having question about privacy and so on. Things that sounds very obvious, but actually they are not, and they need a little bit of more sophistication. And especially concerning when we talk about freedom and control, or inclusion, exclusion, or private and public, which are now, in my opinion, polarities in information ethics, and instead they should be broken down and understood more in context, meaning that a technology or data, even just one record of data, shouldn't be considered just as it is, but it should be taken in context. And so understanding when it's used, where it is used, what is the importance of it, and through that also understanding if it's the case of using it or not, or the way to use it. So I don't think it can be just simplified about in terms of creating new technology, using current technology, be against it or pro it, but actually understanding really the context of each of those issues. I don't know if you are still there.
Yes, we're still here.
If you're still here.
Time is running.
Yeah.
Okay, how many minutes do I have?
1 more minute, please.
Sorry? Should I still go?
One more minute.
Yeah, thanks.
1 more minute. Okay, well, that is mainly what I want to present, and ultimately what I advocate for is a sort of regulatory art, is what I call the regulatory art, which means being more active in trying to having art that can produce social change by creating, yes, artworks with data technology and social issues, which are represented through any form of aesthetics, but at the same time being active in promoting change, and which means to being participatory and engaging, and especially coming up with actual new regulations, which are not that common when we talk about technology, because most technology is created by coders, engineers, and so on. They don't consider much human values, which instead artists are most commonly sensitive to that. And so I think, and nevertheless, artists can bring more creativity in this process of regulating technology or the use of data in very specific ways. And I think that's why I end up to promote the right to be forgotten in United States, something that wasn't something that they even could consider. And in the meanwhile, I became one of the main activists promoting it. Nevertheless, that's how I end up to discover all these patents when until last year, everyone could patent any type of invention concerning algorithms and data processing and interfaces and so on. So you could really patent an algorithm made to kill people without exception, and that would have been fine. So sometimes you do need artists to intervene in these technological systems, which are, however, very about society in a deep sense, especially in these days. So I think I am done now.
Thank you. That's fantastic. That's really great. So thank you, Paolo. And I just want to turn everyone's attention to, you can check out his website, but he's got an event going on if you are traveling around Europe or nearby on the 25th of September at the Beaux-Arts in Belgium. Is that correct, Paolo?
Yes, well, the next shows, well, now in Linz, there's Electronica, this piece, Sociality, is installed in the public space. So they basically printed out and they posted like posters throughout the city, which is pretty cool. And then, yes, the same piece will be shown at Beaux-Arts in Brussels in September, end of September. And in October, we'll have a new project at Le Frenois in France, which is about facial recognition and how to ban facial recognition in all Europe.
Fantastic.
Which is, again, very ambitious, and our regulation with other organizations in Europe. And that will be out next week. So
great. Well, of course, because I'm promoting STARTS events and activities, I was focusing on the 25th. But thank you so much. We will point people toward your work, and we'll come back to you later on with some questions that we'll collect on YouTube.
Sure.
So moving swiftly on, apologies, everyone. We have, you'll have to correct me, it's Tiga Brain, an Australian-born artist and environmental engineer whose work examines issues of ecology, data systems, and infrastructure. So she's going to take a different slant again. She has created wireless networks that respond to natural phenomena, systems for obfuscating fitness data, and online smell-based data service. That sounds interesting. Her work has been shown in Vienna, the Vienna Biennale for Change. I can't say this. The Ganzhou Triennial in the institutions such as Haus der Kulturen der Welt in Berlin, and the New Museum, among others. So welcome, Tiga. Tiga, you correct me, and feel free to get started.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Great. So I'm calling in from Brooklyn, so it's very early here, but really nice to be with you all.
Great.
So I'll try and share my screen. Let me just...
Yeah, I think, Paolo, you have to stop sharing your screen. And yeah, if you can share yours too. Yeah.
Okay, I'm clicking share screen and I'm not seeing anything.
It should be at the bottom left side with the little TV beside the hand.
Yeah. It's not. I might just refresh the browser. Hang on a second.
Yeah, maybe. And Paolo, if you have changed your stop sharing.
I already switched it off, and I think I don't have anything on.
Okay, fine. Maybe I just need to refresh my browser. Whenever you're ready.
Okay, I think that should be working.
Yep, we can see you now. See it now.
Great, excellent. So yeah, I thought I would share a few projects that I have sort of done over the last few years that are addressing this question of data-driven systems, how data is in our lives, and sort of what it feels like to live, you know, under the influence of these systems. So yeah, I mean, I think it's relevant to the conversation we've been having already, because it's very much like they're very much works that are sort of exploring data as a medium. And many of them are collaborations. So I often collaborate with Sam Levine, who's also an artist based here in Brooklyn. And this was a project we did a few years ago as a Rhizome commission that focused on the Enron email data set. This project is called The Good Life. And it addresses the archive that was created when Enron went bankrupt and sort of descended into scandal. So you might remember Enron was a massively successful energy company based in Houston. And in 2001, they went bankrupt following revelations of massive widespread corruption and fraud. So they were investigated by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, the FERC, and a sort of really strange decision was made to publish a good deal of the company's data online in a massive archive of emails. And so these were emails sent between the executives at Enron. It contains 1.6 million emails, and it was cleaned up to contain about 500,000 emails. Yeah, and contains these communications between 1999 and 2003. And it really is the first archive of email of this size, right? It's publicly available, and so even now it's still used in the context of research where there might not be a lot of budget to purchase more data. And so we took this archive and have created this service that allows you to sign up and receive all 225,000 emails from the archive in chronological order. So you can, you know, choose to receive them over. Initially, we had a 30-day plan, but that was sort of untenable in terms of the amount of emails we were sending. And so now you can sign up to receive them over 7 years, 14 years, or 28 years. The emails come to you in the order they were sent and with the appropriate amount of time between each message, so spaced out relative to their original timeline. So, you know, what is in this archive, right? This archive has been extremely influential. And, you know, so this project sort of allows for a context in which someone might actually read this massive archive. So many of the emails are like nauseatingly boring. Unsurprisingly, you know, they're about day-to-day office business. You know, here is an email about a W-2, a tax form. Many of them give you hints of the sort of malpractice that was going on in the company. So here we have an email from Richard B. Saying that they have a particular judge in a case, and I don't like him as a judge, but I would recommend that we give him $500 to $1,000. So you get these sort of hints of what's going on in the company, and particularly as, you know, it really ramps up, particularly as Enron sort of descends into the scandal in their later years. You see romances, you know, bud and then fail. People are getting divorced. People are having affairs in the office. This is a particularly favorite one of mine, from Tracy to Stephen. I really love you. I can't wait to be with you this weekend. I bet you were glad you listened to me and did not buy Enron stock at $21, considering it is $18 today. Love you, Tracy. And so these emails get mixed in with your own. And, you know, when receiving them, I've definitely received, you know, emails about meetings, and then I had to remember that the meeting was happening in the 90s. And so, The FERC has unintentionally produced a remarkable object. This is a quote from Finn Brunton, who wrote on the archive in his book on spam. You know, it contains the public and private mailing activities of 158 people in the upper echelons of a major corporation, frozen in place like the ruins of Pompeii for future researchers. And so by signing up for the Good Life, you get to experience this reenactment. Your email becomes infected with reminders to, you know, go to meetings that happened 20 years ago. But there's a more subtle reason, which is why we were particularly fascinated with this archive, is it's because it was assumed initially to be a good data set about the English language. You know, it was assumed to be representative of how people communicate. And computer scientists used it for many like natural language research projects. But actually, the archive isn't representative of the general population. You know, it's representative. It's, you know, they're communications between mostly white, mostly male, and some corporate criminals, right? It's not representative of the full population. And so there's a very like early historic story here about the bias and the context in which our data sets come from. You know, and despite this limitation, it was used as a backbone for many systems, such as an early version of Siri. And so here you really get to, by signing up to the Good Life, you really get to sort of experience how the sausage is made, you know, all that raw data behind a machine learning system that is invisibly lurking in your life. Of course, you know, now in the context of social media and Google, where data sets are so much larger and contain all of our online activity, you know, in many ways, we're all sort of the Enron, we're all Enron employees now. Our emails, our clicks, our links are collected and used in machine learning systems. And so that sort of, this project really provided the context for another inquiry into what it feels like and what to live with machine learning systems. And this project, this next work, is called The New Organs and was also a collaboration with Sam Levine. It starts with a video. Can you hear the audio there?
No.
No.
Oh, you can't. Okay. Well, I'll just continue on anyway because the New Organs consists of two parts. It consists of a video essay that sort of explores how these systems actually work. And the project really departs from this question and this phenomenon, which is that, you know, most people have a story now about the internet listening in on them. They have some sort of conspiracy theory going where, you know, they might have seen an ad about a conversation they were having, and they have a theory that, like, maybe my phone is listening to me. Maybe the camera is being accessed by some of the companies and some of the apps that are on my phone. So we were really fascinated by these sort of like conspiracy theories that were emerging around targeted advertising and to explain, you know, the effectiveness of it. You know, if Facebook denies the theory that they're listening to you via your phone, and yet this is a very like sort of pervasive story. So yeah, the project consists of two parts. There's a video essay that explores how these systems actually work. And then we also set out to create an archive of people's experiences and stories like this, of these predictive systems, how it feels to live on algorithmic platforms that are trying to anticipate your every behavior. And so the project was done with Mozilla, and we did a call out for contributions of these stories and received about 1,000, maybe 1,500 stories from folks describing creepy experiences they'd had with advertising and what they thought was going on. You know, we recruited people via Facebook, so targeting them to contribute their stories, and then took their stories and created this sort of video archive of these experiences. And so we, you know, algorithmically created these videos. Many of them sort of stories such as this one, you know, Facebook advertisingly seemingly knew I was queer before I had told anybody. So, you know, moments where targeted advertising was able to anticipate or predict what people's sort of sexual orientation were. Here's another. I can basically use Instagram ads as a casual period tracker. I have been served pad and tampon ads before my period for the last few months. So, I mean, some things in our lives are fairly predictable. People reporting how advertising changed, you know, once they got into relationships. So this person saying when they got into a relationship, the ads that they were targeted with drastically changed. Gone with the 5 tips to lose weight and find sexy singles, you know, and now I receive 5 to 10 ads for pregnancy tests a day. And so there's hundreds of these stories that you can explore on the website. You know, and yeah, really looking at this sort of new system of what Shoshana Zuboff calls, you know, surveillance capitalism, and really just how it feels, you know. And an interesting thing about the archive too is it sort of reveals like what sort of literacies people have around these systems, right? So the feeling that we are being surveilled, the feeling in these stories is absolutely correct. And yet some of these explanations, such as, you know, the idea that your phone is listening to, like the explanation is sort of based in an older model of surveillance rather than one based on, you know, these statistical systems. How am I going with time? Should I talk about one more, or?
Time is pretty up.
Time is pretty up. Okay, well, shall we leave it there? Yeah, thank you so much.
So it's amazing stuff. Thank you so much. Some great people, and this was another great talk. Thank you so much, and stick around for the panel later on. If you have questions for this talk, again, put them through YouTube, and we'll collect them. We'll discuss them later on today. So next on our panel, we have Joshua Cordway. And I'm just going to read his very brief bio. Thank you, Josh. Josh is an artist who works with technology and its impact on culture and society. He often works in collaboration with Lise Autogenia. So if you would like to start any time, you are ready, and maybe show you're already visible, so take it away.
Hello. Yeah, it's interesting listening to everybody else's, because I feel that my presentation is probably going to relate more than I thought it would to other people's presentations. I'm also going to present some projects that Lisa and I have done over the years. And I had a bit of a think about what would be suitable for this, and I'm trying to draw some connections between our projects and COVID, although we haven't obviously done anything directly about that. We've tended to work. Is Paolo's screen showing currently? Because that's what
I see. Oh yes, Paolo's is still showing. I'm not sure why. But maybe when are you sharing a screen? If you are.
No, I'm not. I'm just not yet. I will in a minute.
Okay. So maybe it'll disappear when you. Everyone, pin Josh to your.
No, it's okay. I'll. So yeah, Lisa and I have worked for a long time with data, thinking about data in material terms as a material to work with, and thinking very much about how society creates meaning with data and the kind of aesthetics of data. I'm going to start. I'm going to show. So, is this working now?
Something's starting. It's black at the moment. It looks like it's there.
So, I'm going to talk about this project, which was a project we did in the late 90s called Black Shoals. It was a visualization of global finance. It was a dome that you stood under in the gallery, or lounged under, like this person is. And it was full of stars. It looked like a planetarium, and every star in the sky represented a company trading on the world stock markets. Basically, every company, every publicly traded company in the world, pretty much, that matters, is represented in the dome. And it's connected in real time via the Thomson Reuters network to all of the stock markets in the world. So basically, if you stand, there's a couple of other things which I'm going to, for the sake of, it's a big and hairy project that's gone on for many years. So there's a lot of stuff in there, so I'm going to ignore a lot of it. But basically, if you stood underneath the dome, you could see in real time a pretty sizable chunk of all the world's money moving around the world. Every time a stock was traded on one of the companies, any company anywhere, that the corresponding star would just glow a little bit brighter. And if there was like a run on a stock, you'd see that star kind of flickering and glowing brighter. So if you stood underneath it, you kind of got this sort of sense of the kind of panopticon. I'll skip this slide. So you got the kind of sense of that you were seeing this sort of powerful sense that you had an overview of all of the money in the world. But at the same time, we kind of intended, and part of the reason we used a dome and that we forced people to look up at it, like you have to look up at a church roof, was that you got this sort of sense that of the vastness of it and your kind of tinyness in comparison. And this sort of sense of the sublime seemed to be a kind of important aesthetic in what since then's kind of got known as big data and all of that kind of thing. And this sort of sense of the sublime is also kind of present in the metaphors we use to talk about data when we talk about oceans of data and things like that. We're kind of acknowledging somewhere that there's this sort of sense of loss of self, and there's a sense of lostness when we try to imagine the vastness of these things. And there's a kind of, especially then, I think people are probably more aware of it now, but there's a kind of unacknowledged sense of this, I'm just going to skip through. When you see visualizations like this, which isn't by me, I'm sorry, I looked this up very quickly this morning, I can't remember who it was by. It kind of primarily conveys just vastness. You've got an overview of, this is an overview of Facebook's social graph, but it just conveys the enormity of it. And when you see something like this, it reminds me, anyway, there's a scene in The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy where, as a punishment, there's a kind of torture device in which the person being tortured is put inside a machine which shows them the entire universe all in one moment, and the vastness of the spaces between the stars, and then it has a tiny little arrow that says you are here. And this kind of I'd almost say kind of quasi religious experience of data is problematic, and we were thinking about that a lot when we made Black Shoals, about how having this kind of sense of the vastness of the data made it very hard to actually locate yourself and to think critically about it. I'm going to talk about another project now, which relates, I think, to, well, I'll get there. So this is a project we did called Most Blue Skies, and we did this for the COP 20 something a long time ago, for a climate change summit in Copenhagen. And it's a gallery piece. When you enter the gallery, you just see this blue square, and above it you see the name of a place, a description of a place like 15 kilometers north of Razak Deme in France. And that place is the place that currently has the bluest sky in the world. And underneath the blue square is the best visualization we could make of the exact color of the sky in the bluest sky in the world in real time. But if you can see in this picture behind this square, you can see a map and you can see some other stuff behind it. So if you go behind the square, you kind of see this map at first, and the little yellow box there is flickering around the map, and you see all sorts of calculations taking place on the map, and it's calculating the color of the sky in all these places. And on the floor of the gallery, there's this big pile of computers, rather dated looking computers now. I'm sure they looked impressive at the time. And on the screens, you see these kind of data feeds that it's working with, from satellite data and topological data and Earth monitoring networks and things like that to calculate the sky colors. And I think in part of what we're trying to do with this project was think about how data and the sort of quantification of life in general has changed our idea of how nature's constructed and what nature means to us. Because there's a tendency in culture to place nature and science and technology in opposition to each other. And I think Most Blue Skies was sort of struggling to try and find an aesthetic that wasn't a return to an essentialist idea of nature, and it wasn't a sort of technological dystopia, but it was a sort of synthesis in which the complexities of the technological world are acknowledged, but they're not alienated from the natural world, and a sense that the sort of beauty is technologically mediated.
Sorry, I have to let you know you're nearly out of time.
Geez, okay, thank you. Okay, so we're going to go to this project, which is this person is called Fry Richardson. This is a more recent project, getting back to the Panopticon. This was a sort of utopian project. He was the person that basically invented modern weather forecasting. And he had the idea, this was before electronic computers, that that you would be able to calculate the weather for the world. And this is how he imagined it: 64,000 mathematicians working together in a building as fast as they could, calculating the weather as fast as they could. And we did this project. We're trying to kind of get back to a kind of tactile, sensual relationship with data. We did this project where we attempt to calculate the weather in real time, as a sort of performance thing, which we've done a couple of times. And we are working on a project now where we're trying to create a large-scale public performance in which thousands of people will be able to work together to try and calculate the weather together. The idea being that to kind of create a sort of ritual around the act of calculation and around data, to provide people with a sort of way of engaging with things like climate. I'm going to have to leave it there by the sound of it.
Well, yes, maybe in the panel you can discuss more and we can get into it a bit more. It's fascinating work, and I have to say I did see the, what do you call it, the big sky at the Big Bang data, which was amazing, I have to say. So I can see why it's a long-term project. Thank you so much, Joshua. That was fantastic. Again, such great and interesting talks. And last but not least, for this first session, we have Dr. Jacob Skinner, who's going to talk about his work. He has worked in data-enabled health for over 10 years, and those passion and experience in human-centered technology thrive through his passion, I should say. Thrive Wearables was founded in 2015 to deliver exponential positive impact in multiple emerging health and wellness markets. So this is coming from a little bit of a different slant. Thrive pioneer the design and development of wearable technology products with user-validated physical technologies and digital systems, enabled with data science across a myriad of application areas. Thrive have global reach through their client partners and often working together on long-term and collaborative projects. And he was part of the Wear Sustain project a few years back that I was part of as a consortium member. So welcome, Jacob, and whenever you're ready, you can say hello and share your screen and all that. Thank you.
Thank you, Camille. Very appreciate the invite, and I'll keep things fairly succinct because I know I've jumped into this session as opposed to the one I was originally slated for, and we're running through the time anyway. So I'll just give a bit of background on my interaction with data and try to focus in on the post-COVID sort of narrative, I suppose. But I'm to put it in context, I'm not an artist. I've been fascinated listening to the presentations so far, and my information, I suppose, is a lot drier and much more engineering based, I suppose. But so do forgive me for that. But hopefully, I'll raise some sort of thoughts on the pragmatics of where we're at with data after the COVID scenario has played out. Should I share my screen in the bottom?
Yeah, it's on the bottom left, in the middle of the chat and the hand.
How's that working?
Yeah, we can see it.
Yeah, great.
So really, as Camille said, I work in a commercial organization. So we are a wearable technology company. And of course, wearable technology is really at the epicenter of data in many cases. And because of the nature of that data, because people are inherently looking to use data for health and positive benefits, there's a risk and there's an ethical concern, I suppose, with how data is used from that perspective. So I'm really fascinated by how things emerge in the data space for positive reasons, but also have concerns over the flip side of that in terms of the ethics, in terms of how that data ends up getting used. And I guess I'll talk a little bit about how that sort of wraps around, I suppose, into politics and into the fundamental containers of data when it comes to infrastructure and when it comes to who has access to that information. Can you see my slides?
Yeah, no problem.
Awesome. So yeah, I've just got three kind of bullets really that I'm going to talk through. I'm going to start with talking a little bit about this sort of ethical part, because it's really, I feel things have changed a lot since COVID. COVID has increased our reliance on data for a start. So not too long ago, certain types of technologies were not really being considered. So contact tracing and actually the sort of tracking angle to that is really quite scary from the perspective of ethics and from how people originally before COVID were thinking about data. I think a lot of things have fallen down in terms of the regulatory side of things, which again is a real ethical concern. I'm going to talk a bit about some of the systems and the networks that are now sort of coming online and will have a major effect on how we use data and how it gets thrown around and connected and linked together, and lead into sort of a bit of a sort of thought about the future and what that holds for people using data for products, services, and other things. So I think with COVID, what we've seen is that there are all sorts of areas where people are now giving away freely lots of information. So contact tracing is one of those. Things like thermal detection, airports, facial recognition, looking at people with much more scrutiny. And I think what's not seen really is all the behind the scenes stuff that's happening around that. So, okay, we're kind of putting forward these ideas that we need to know where people have been, but is that data deleted after we've worked out that they haven't got COVID? Almost certainly not. And I think it's probably just desensitizing people to a great extent in terms of allowing new types of technologies to come along and be accepted by society. And this, isn't a new thing in terms of Facebook, in terms of social media, in all the ways that we're already connected. This is just another layer of that. But it's definitely something that having gone through COVID, we're now much more willing to sacrifice for an apparent existential threat, or in some cases a genuine one. And this links into things like regulatory barriers as well. So within the context of health technologies, medical devices have always been very highly regulated for obvious reasons. And as we go forward with clinical trials being fast-tracked and with technologies being used for COVID-related applications, there's a real push against much of the regulatory frameworks that exist within health technologies and inherently that's linked to data. Now, I don't think this is always necessarily a bad thing, because some of the regulatory frameworks that exist can be quite outdated to some degree, and we're seeing huge benefits from new emerging technologies. Having suitable regulatory frameworks around those new technologies and those emerging opportunities is really important, and it can be very slow for those things to be deployed and to be amended and changed to suit new technologies. But we do run the risk of just allowing sort of perceived red tape to be stripped away for the sake of notional benefits relating to technologies that could be linked to COVID and other things. So I have concerns over the way people have started to think about deploying technologies. I mean, this is not a new thing either. The idea of moving fast and breaking things, the ideas around, it's fine, just keep innovating, and the solution will sort of emerge. This has led us to many problems already with this sort of glamorization of disruption, and the idea that just changing systems is the most important thing, and working out the consequences later seems to be the normal line. And this has been amplified, I think, through lots of parts of the system as COVID has emerged. Of course, personal data is increasing in resolution as well. So 5-6 years ago, when we were looking at measuring steps with wearable technology, that was a fairly innocuous thing, but had a reasonable amount of private information associated with it, people's location, potentially how active they were, where they've moved from and to. But now the resolution of the sensors within wearable tech is so much higher that there is a real concern, I think, that it's a kind of, we're reaching a point of no return to some degree. And things like the data breach at Garmin is a really good example of this. So a few months ago, maybe a month ago, there was a massive data breach with Garmin. For those who don't know what that is, it's a fitness tracking platform set of technologies. Everyone on the Garmin system lost connection to the server, but more importantly, their system was compromised by an attacker who they claim didn't steal any data. But at the end of the day, that was a compromised system containing the personal health metrics, wellness information, all sorts of derivative data that potentially has been subsumed by a nefarious party. So I think there's a real danger that we're careering towards very, very high resolution disclosure of personal information en masse across the globe, and we really don't have control of the other side of that equation, which is the security and the ownership even of that data. And of course, technologies such as blockchain and other data paradigms are a potential solution to that. But at the moment, we have a very siloed, centralized approach, which means that health data increasing in resolution and sensitivity is increasingly at risk, and in control of that data are big companies who we don't really get to mess with, I suppose. So I think, from the perspective of someone who is creating some of these technologies, we have a real fine line to tread. We have to be very careful with what our approaches to generating new technologies and how we're going to actually try to be part of the solution and try to be pioneering approaches to those things. And it's very difficult to do that in a very small scale way, because these are quite significant global issues. And I think linking it to the politics side of things, there ultimately has to be a political framework whereby the principles that we're trying to achieve with data security and privacy are actually built into that. And I think, unfortunately, that is tumbling away and going in the wrong direction as well. So there's a very specific risk at the moment with data ownership, access, and all those kind of things that links directly into the political system that we're seeing emerge globally, which is rather scary. I guess, to punctuate that, situations like Cambridge Analytica a few years back, that is such a small version of reality when it comes to the big plays that are going on in the manipulation of society through data. And that data, okay, traditionally, maybe we've used social media platforms, we've seen Cambridge Analytica, but increasingly, if there are data sets that link to people's personal data and to their activity and to their preferences in terms of training or how they interact and who they interact with in that context, it just adds another layer of risk, I suppose, and for manipulation and for political aims to be injected into people's lives without them really knowing about it.
So I have to interrupt you. That seems like a natural end. Yes.
Sure. Let's stop there. I won't go on to the other parts. That's fine.
Apparently, we're 20 minutes late running, so I'm sorry.
No, it's fine.
But before we move on, before we start the next session, I just wanted to ask, it seems that we don't have any questions in the main YouTube channel at the moment, but I just wanted to ask all the panelists if you have any questions. We're going to have a big breakout at the end of the session, the 2 sessions, but before we move on to the next session, I'd like to find out if any of the first few have any questions for each other, and maybe just put your hand up. We want to keep it super short, as I said, but if you have any burning questions before we move on to the next session for each other, that would be brilliant. So put your hand up if you have a question, and if I get no hands up, I will move on to the next session. Nothing burning. Oh, did I see somebody? No, I don't think that's a hand.
Bushra.
Bushra, oh yeah, but Bushra, I was talking about the first panelist, but if you have a burning question, go for it.
Just a quick one. I think, do you think the regulations are going to catch up, which I think they need to, with track and trace and how to control, but to be able to use the data effectively?
Who are you aiming this question at?
The most recent speaker.
Oh, Jacob, okay.
Yeah.
Sure, yeah. I don't know is the answer, and I think really the concern I have and the worry is just that the whole political system is so biased towards control and monitoring and surveillance that there won't be a political will for that to happen. And I think that's really my point. We're living in a world where those kind of systems are attractive to those kind of people who are wielding the power. So there's a natural sort of unfortunate positive feedback loop in terms of that. Regulation is like a little bit out of step with the reality. So Cambridge Analytica weren't supposed to do what they did, and regulation didn't really help with that. So maybe there's it's a bit of a smokescreen to some degree, because the actors in the system are going to manipulate and hack and do what they do.
Yep.
Great, thank you so much. So so we will move swiftly along. I would like to say that we also thought that Jacob was a great segue into the next panel, because he has worked in wearables, and there's a connection with some of the next speakers around wearables and fashion. So the next session is called Fashion Materializing Numbers, and we're asking questions around how fashion is integrated into systems of data collection. How does data collection, sustainability concerns, and COVID change fashion design? and what type of misuse of data takes place in the fashion value and supply chains. And there's many other questions that we put in the description of this panel, so I hope you'll have a look at that and think about what you might want to ask this panel or the previous panelists for this little next period of time. So I want to introduce our next round of speakers. We have Dr. Becky Stewart, Sarah Tico, founder of Hatsumi, and Bushra Burge, who's the founder and creative director of BB Studios. We're going to start with Becky Stewart, who's given us a very nice, succinct intro or bio. She is a lecturer at the Dyson School of Design Engineering at Imperial College London. Take it away, Becky.
Thank you so much. Let me get the screen sharing going. And hopefully that is certainly shout and interrupt if that is not showing a slide right now.
Yes, it's great. Thanks.
Fantastic. Okay, great. So I thought a good place to start the session would maybe bringing the kind of the topic of data back to the body. So data can sometimes be kind of referred to in a bit of an esoteric way. And we talk about kind of the aesthetics and the visualizations and the fantastic interpretive work that we saw in the previous session. But I come from kind of the engineering side. I collaborate a lot with artists. So I thought maybe we tie back to what are the sensors? What is the actual numbers representing? How does it come and start from the body as it kind of moves outwards into the world and lives the second life? So to kind of frame this within wearables, I thought we'd talk about first just a quick run through of what are some types of raw data that wearables might generate. And so this isn't an exhaustive list, and this is just a list I've kind of made up, but we can think of things that are biosignals or other kind of biometrics. So this could be things that are about kind of data, that numbers that our body is generating, our heart rate, our so on, fingerprints. Things about the motion of our body, how our body is moving in space, largely kind of relative to itself. It can be about location, so where our body is in the greater context of the world and kind of placing it in the environment. And then also how we interact with interfaces and what those interactions are. So all of these are different kinds of pieces of data that could be generated by wearables. So just some examples in a little bit more depth. So I work, my research group works a lot with e-textiles, smart textiles. And so one of the kind of the biosignals that we capture and generate are from things called like stretch sensors. So using conductive textiles and monitoring how they stretch in order to produce signals that we can tie back to information about how an arm is bent, how you're leaning over, your posture, and so on. But of course, this kind of the area of biosignals and metrics are also a lot of the types of signals that we would associate with Fitbits and so on. So, you know, your heart rate, your skin resistance, conductivity, kind of how sweaty you are, and those kinds of numbers as well. We then can also track body motion. Again, not motion relative to the rest of the world, but just motion relative to ourselves. So one of the major sensors that gets used with this, so accelerometers are one. Accelerometers packaged up with some other sensors put together. You get inertia measurement units, IMUs. And so in my work, we do a lot of work with wearables that have audio interfaces. So you're using audio as the main way to communicate back and forth with the computer to convey information. And this is also then what gets used a lot in anything that does head tracking. So VR goggles, anything that the way where you're looking is of importance to some other system. And so tracking body motion is one thing. Certainly accelerometers, kind of a cheaper version, you see in a lot of products as well. Then we can talk about where the body is located inside of space as well. So this is now actually quite an old project of mine, a collaboration with Dominic Wilcox. And so this is a beautiful pair of handmade shoes that had GPS embedded attached to the heel of it. And the idea being it would track where you are in the world using the GPS system. And then it would be pre-programmed a destination to go home. And so the LEDs on the toe box of the shoes, there was 2 different displays, one on each shoe, would show you the direction you needed to walk in order to get home. So this is an example of this is data that's being collected about where you are relative to a series of satellites that are orbiting the Earth at any given time. So this is placing us in location, in relative location to other objects in the world, in this case, satellites, but it also could be in kind of smaller retail establishments. What's getting much more popular is you can have kind of Bluetooth beacons and other things where instead of saying, where is this sensor relative to something in inner space, where is the sensor relative to some other things that are broadcasting from a retail floor, to be able to position that person from within. Also can Wi-Fi triangulation and other kinds of technologies can help derive the same kind of information. But where is the body in space relative to a second object or set of objects? And then kind of the last kind of series of data is interface interactions. So these are not things where we care so much about exactly what the body is doing, but more of the intent of what the action was. So this could be as simple as pushing buttons. So this is just an image of some e-textile swatches of making a conductive felt press button. So when you press it, the LED turns on. But these kinds of things, these are deliberate actions in order to control a computer interface, as opposed to, like your Fitbit or any other wearable where it's more to monitor and kind of do more of a quantified self. This is now to explicitly interact with a human-computer interface. So that's kind of just grounding some of the different data types that we talk about when we talk about data in the world to what's the data being generated from the body. What's the starting point of those numbers? So once we have those numbers, what can we do with it? What are the possibilities? And so what can be inferred from data? And so again,
Becky, I need to interrupt you. Are we meant to be seeing images?
Are the slides not changing?
No, I'm sorry. I was like letting it go and I thought, oh, this must be her presentation. I'm sorry.
Jitsi. Let me just
pick up where you left off, but just take us to the last, the last slide.
Let me just quickly toggle I'll toggle the screen share and see if that, let me just try the screen share again and see if that. Do you have a new slide at least? Should be what can be inferred from data now?
Yeah, see it now.
Okay, we'll see if this progresses. Did a new piece of text just appear? Gestural recognition?
No.
Okay, fantastic. Maybe it doesn't like the screen share.
Maybe.
If we'll just make it bigger like that, and we'll just show it from that interface instead.
You might want to refresh your own screen as well. I had to refresh mine to see it.
Is it not, has nothing changed?
Nothing's changed.
Okay, let me stop the screen share one more time. Okay, now do you just see the keynote without it being presented?
No.
No.
I think this is what was happening, Paolo, earlier, that it somehow is holding on to. Maybe because we're streaming out, I don't know. Don't know. Like I say, you might want to refresh your screen. We can give you 30 seconds to do that.
Okay, you mean refresh the browser with
the browser, sorry,
okay,
that's what I mean, yeah. apologies, everyone. We love Jitsi for its open sourceness, but it's definitely not as stable as Zoom. So apologies. She will be coming in now.
Okay. Back now.
Yes, I see something. Yes, we see your deck now.
Okay, well, I won't hit present. We'll just go from the screen.
Fine.
Fun. Okay. Sorry, I thought you saw images before. That's okay. We'll make this work. I was doing so good on time until that as well.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Okay, not your fault. So what can be inferred from the data then that is being generated from the body? Kind of roughly group this into three types of recognition, of interpretation, being gestural activity and then social activity. So just to kind of put this in context of what these things might be with kind of current products and projects. Gesture recognition, for example, is something that occurs in the Google Levi's collaboration for their trucker jacket, which if you're inside the kind of the wearable smart textile space at all, you are very much familiar with. It came out a couple years ago now, and they've had some subsequent projects. But what it is conductive threads that are embedded into the sleeve of this jacket. And then it's using essentially the same maths in the background that is being used to detect where your fingers are on your screen of your phone. But that's using then, it can then use another set of algorithms called gesture recognition in order to figure out not just that your finger is above a certain location on your wrist, but kind of across time, have you made a swiping gesture? Have you made a tap? These kinds of interpretations. Well, then activity recognition is to try to infer some larger context around the type of activity that you are doing using, again, a collection of the sensor data, such as the different ways you might track the body with the biosignals in combination with perhaps motion tracking as well. Context might be given further by where you are in space, the recognition that you're on in a shop floor, in a particular shop, so can be inferred what your activities might be when you're there. So one example of a product out on the market right now that uses activity recognition is by Wearable X, and they have the Naughty X yoga pants, which are yoga pants that have accelerometers embedded kind of in for each limb of the lower half of the body. And so this data is transmitted over Bluetooth to a phone, to an app that then is interpreting, given these different sensor locations and their values, combined with, I do believe it works as you're supposed to be doing a particular posture, yoga posture. Can you improve your form? Can you adjust what you need to do in order to improve your alignment, so on. So that's applying activity recognition to a series of sensors. And then the kind of a bit more, not at a product stage and not necessarily looking at it to productize this, but part of the kind of university research happening in my lab is looking at things that we can call social activity recognition. So this is being able to look at these same kinds of sensor signals instead of saying, oh, I can tell you're running right now, or I can tell you're sitting at your desk. Instead saying, I'm observing these signals that are being generated and can infer that you are in a seated conversation in a meeting room with other people, and you currently right now are the speaker. And so we're generating this inference from data that are just pressure sensors in textile, in trousers that are being worn by the different participants sitting around the table. And so We're able to look at how pressure is distributed across the body as we make small shifts in our postures when we're either listening or speaking or having other social interactions and cues, and trying to pick that up inside of the basically micro postural changes and be able to infer social activity, engagement levels from these kinds of signals. So just kind of in closing, when we're talking about data, especially data in fashion, as in fashion tied to the body, what we need to consider is what the data source is. What are the sensors we're actually talking about? What are we placing on the body? What are we measuring? How it's being processed so that we know what kinds of inferences can be made, are we trying to make? What are the limitations? What are the potentials there? But then where is that processing physically happening? When we're talking about things around privacy and security, if we're taking that processing and it's happening in a phone, is that processing happening elsewhere in the world on a server owned by Google? How is that? What are those implications? It has a physical footprint that is to be tracked, that has legal jurisdiction associated with it. And then how does it get between those places as well? How that data moves around and how it moves from those sensors on the body to the places being processed, and then in a way that is interpreted by you and third parties, is also an important consideration to make. So thank you. Sorry that ended up all being longer than.
Thank you, Becky. That's really, really interesting, and hopefully a good start for the session. So thank you so much. Fantastic. So next we move on to Sarah Tico, and she's the founder of Hatsumi. She works broadly across the field of immersive technology, arts, and healthcare. She is founder of Hatsumi, who are developing a tool to visualize lived experience of pain, emotion using 3D drawing and sound. She is the producer of Explore Deep, a breath-controlled VR experience designed to manage anxiety, and continues to support the XR industry through her role as healthcare lead in Immerse UK. She also sits as a member of the XR Safety Initiative Medical XR Council. So welcome, Sarah, and looks like you're ready to go. So fantastic.
Wow. Cool. All right, it is all working. Kind of feel like that's the whole presentation really already done. But yes, hello everyone. Thank you so much for having me. You can see my slides, yeah?
Yes, we can.
Amazing. Cool. So I'm just going to run a little bit through some of the projects that I'm involved in, and I guess the journey that took me there, as well as some of the sort of wider implications of how XR specifically is used in health and well-being, and potentially what the future of that could really look like. So I have a background working, well, I studied anthropology at university, and it was like not long after I graduated, my father actually passed away, and it really sort of was an interesting moment where I really was kind of reconsidering what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. And it was around that time that I started to volunteer and eventually work at a gallery in Brighton called Fabrica. And it was really like this installation that I think was an introduction to what immersive experiences could be. This is a project by an artist called Karina Kaikonen called The Blue Route. And every shirt that you see in this image, it was contributed by the volunteers that worked on this installation. And I remember having conversations with all the people that would come through the galleries of who these people were and the stories of grief and loss. And I think just being able to visualize stories in a very different way. And I realized that the arts are such an incredible tool for starting a conversation with people in a way that sometimes you couldn't otherwise. And I think for me, I always found like it was something quite inaccessible for a cultural elite. And so it was really only in my early 20s that I found that it was something that I wanted to engage in myself. So skip forward a few years later, and I ended up becoming quite mentally unwell. I had what was later described as a psychotic episode. And I remember sitting in this doctor's office, sort of trying to describe what had happened to me and not really having the words to articulate that at all. And I kind of wanted to say, hey, listen, like, I know this is a bit weird and scary, but I think I'm actually doing all right. And, you know, thanks for offering me lithium, but I don't really want that. And it made me really think about, you know, this world of arts and storytelling that I'd become involved in. By that point, I was also working in film as well. And I became really fascinated with how we could use things like technology to really understand lived experience, and especially from, you know, a first person experience as well. And it was around the time when everyone was sort of hailing, you know, virtual reality as the ultimate empathy machine. And I think I've always been skeptical of that, but I was really fascinated by this idea of being put into the shoes of somebody else, and what could you potentially learn from it. And I think this is a really interesting example of a project that happened quite a few years ago called A Machine to Be Another by Be Another Lab, which was this body swapping experiment where a camera is being live streamed into the headset of somebody else, and this kind of fusion performative experience where over time then people did feel embodied in the other person. And it was really fascinating to see the research around this and how it decreased gender bias, racial biases, and actually had some quite profound effects on people. So around this time I moved to Australia. I ended up working at something called the Big Anxiety Festival, which was run through the University of New South Wales in Sydney. And it was there I met an incredible researcher called Catherine Boydell. She was actually, or still is, based at the Black Dog Institute in Sydney, and introduced me to this really fascinating tool called body mapping. So at the time I was running a series of exhibitions about how virtual reality could be used to both explore and support people with mental health. And prior to that, I think I'd seen it as very much sort of storytelling experiences in that classic way of you or the artist telling you their story, or how like virtual reality could reduce pain and be used in things like physiotherapy and movement. But it was really this technique, body map storytelling, that she introduced me to that really caught my imagination. And this is a technique that was developed in South Africa in early 2002, initially to support women living with HIV and AIDS to talk about the trauma of their experience, and naturally that there has for a long time been stigma around that. Then using the arts and drawing as a way of being able to communicate that experience. So using colours, words, textures on a drawing, an outline of your body, and using that as a way of having a very different conversation about your own lived experience. And it's been applied across a variety of different experiences around the world. And I think it's just such a powerful tool just to get people to think about sensory experience in a different way. So for example, with things like anxiety, you know, how would you visualize perhaps that the butterflies in your stomach, or when your throat feels tight? And I think by reimagining that, you get this different form of sensory awareness. And so over the last few years, I've been working to translate this into a virtual reality experience. And as part of this research, I've been running things like co-design workshops. It was really wonderful going back to places like Fabrica and running workshops there. And that nice moment when you realize you're not just doing the admin and volunteering behind the scenes anymore, but actually able to run things is quite a nice moment in your career. These were actually meant to be animated GIFs, but they are not working today, apparently. But here are some early examples of a prototype that we've been developing and really testing out. If we are going to create these different drawing tools, what would they look like? You know, what colors would people want? What sort of textures? And how would we animate them? And it's been really fascinating to see the sort of different illustrations that people have created over time. So on the top left, this is actually a sound designer illustrating the feeling of making music. And these white lines are kind of going into his chest and coming back out in this sort of circular loop. On the top right as well is an illustration of someone telling their partner that they love them for the first time. And this kind of, they were trying to draw as many lines coming out of their chest as possible. And that idea of wanting to engulf someone almost in their care for them. And it's really, through this process, has made me think about how we do relate to our bodies in very different ways. And to begin with, I actually never anticipated that people would draw outside of the body, but I'm seeing that more and more, that there are different sort of states and experiences that aren't just on our skin or inside our stomachs or on our heads or our cheeks, but we are surrounded by feeling. And how can we use what is essentially qualitative data in a digital environment to really understand how people are making sense of their own experience? And can we start to do things like run quantitative analyses on this qualitative data, which is something that we're exploring now. And so with the research, as we've gone on, we've taken it to other hospitals. So for example, this is somebody living with chronic pain and illustrating his experience with his consultant. And so now what we're looking at is not only can this be a tool to help people understand and make sense of their own lived experience, but how could it be used in diagnostics? And could having an illustration like this help a doctor better understand a patient's experience? And for example, what happens if you have 1,000 chronic pain patients illustrating their experience? Like, would they look similar? Would they look different? And if you do combine that with more standardized tests, so for example, the current standardized test for chronic pain is called the McGill pain form. And it's, you know, a scale of 1 to 10, and pain is not on a scale of 1 to 10. My 10 may be very, very different to yours. But how can we use the combination of these to get a real richer understanding? And how can we use this as a form of public engagement? Like, can we create a sort of terracotta army of body maps to really, you know, bring awareness to the different ways that people understand their sort of internal maps? And how might that differ depending on your cultural background or your gender or your age? And that's something that we're exploring more and more now as well. With our lovely team. And, you know, I think for these sort of experiences, you do need to have like very much cross-disciplinary teams. And like this project was meant to be a PhD, which I decided to do independently, but I think you can still apply that academic rigor and work with scientists and artists. And we've also been working with synesthetes and thinking about, you know, different ways of understanding this sort of cross-modal experience. Also Simon, who's just in the far left, he's a sound designer, and we're now thinking about how we can create like a sound-based taxonomy of pain as well, to kind of have this much richer experience. So
this has to be your last slide. Sorry, Sarah, we're running low on time.
That is absolutely fine. All right, I'm going to skip forward a little bit and just talk about my final thing, which is really just about the world of XR in health. And so at the moment, then I think it's lots of independent organizations and researchers, and ultimately there's some real barriers to distribution because there's no NHS XR strategy. I think finding new ways to enable people to collaborate, because it's quite a challenging landscape if you're not supported by a large academic institution. And I think just by going for investment, you know, I don't know if that's really the thing that works either. And so I think we really need to reimagine what this looks like and how to have a broader, more diverse bunch of people working in this space. And that includes people with lived experience, artists, researchers, and thinking about how we can really collaborate with the games industry as well, and think about how we can make, you know, beautiful, compelling experiences that can ultimately help people as well. So that's it. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Sarah. Thank you. That's great. Fabulous. Okay, wow, some really interesting talks that we've covered. So last but not least in this session is Busha Burge, founder of and creative director of BB Studios, is an award-winning entrepreneur. She has an extensive background in creative and digital sectors with previous careers in sustainable fashion, fashion academia, finance databases. She has a BSc honors in biochemistry at Imperial, BA in fashion from London College of Fashion, MA in Applied Imagination, Central St. Martin's, is currently a visiting lecturer at Royal College of Art and Sotheby's, as well as an international exhibiting artist, speaker, and consultant. So hopefully we're going to cover the connection of fashion and data in this talk. And she says she has an eclectic and anti-disciplinary background, driving her creative innovation studio, and has recent projects combining her passion for ethical issues and conceptual creative technology with recent experiential project integrating proprietary wearables within sustainable couture and multi-sensory VR on plastic pollution. So quite a lot there. Fantastic, Busher, whenever you're ready. Are you ready? Can we hear you? I can't hear you. Am I alone in that? Oh,
No,
there's
looks like
something.
you're muted.
Oh,
Bushra.
yeah, Bushra, you're muted. I hear Lucy.
Hi.
There you are. There you are. Great. Thank you.
Sorry about that. Let me
worries.
share my screen. Select window screen. Okay. Can you see that?
I can see it, yes, but I don't see it full screen. I just see your deck.
Okay. Can you see it now?
No.
Oh,
You might just make your, I think you might have problems with that anyway, like others have. You might want to just make your main screen. Yeah, like that.
okay. Let's start then. So when we're talking about, data and fashion, I was thinking, what is it really about? And in kind of reference to the empathy machine, I've worked quite a lot with VR. It's sort of like an illusion machine. And it really is, for me, about mixed realities, which I incorporate into my studio work as some quick examples. And I think, like Sarah, maybe I should give a little bit of background of how I came to this sort of mixed reality of actually fashion and VR, really. So I had a career back in the 90s as a database coder, working on sort of big data of its time. And, I was a science and tech person. And then I had a career change and worked in sustainable fashion. And this is a picture actually of in 2009, where I helped set up a sustainable fashion consultancy, where influencers were a lot more wholesome. We've got Bonnie right there from Harry Potter. And then I decided about 10 years ago now, God, time's flown, to consolidate it all into a master's. And actually my final year project, I looked at personal non-pharma data to trigger a sense of self, which back then it seemed like, okay, why wouldn't we use that? And now it's kind of used in a really sinister, exploitative way. It's the qualitative data is measured in a quantitative way through things like Facebook and, to create our profiles and how the profiles can be targeted. So then this led to my own studio just around 2015. So, and it was kind of around, I've crossed paths with Becky and other people in eStitches when there's like a whole group of us sort of really mixing up a lot of different disciplines, I think in response to changing world, and the scope of design was is quite different to it was, say, when I was doing data stuff back in the late 90s. So then I was kind of thinking about what does the illusion machine mean, and in terms of data and fashion, and it kind of, even in fashion speak, it has another, we can translate it again into truth, presence, identity, and projection. And these kind of layers is what we communicate to the consumer. But in the background, data is pretty critical for the absolute nitty gritty of fashion, and for the rest of the presentation, I will try and make it quick. I'll tell you what, Camille, this is such a big topic to fit into. It's like crazy. So, but I thought I'd just data is so fundamental to fashion, because fashion is a logistics, forecasting, and sales business. And it always has been. So, we look at this diagram, everything from, inventory to CAD to manufacturing.
Can you make it slightly bigger? Hard to see.
Ooh, how do I make it? Okay, let me try and make the, I'm not sure sorry.
You should be able to put it on presentation mode on the bottom.
Yeah, we had trouble with that, so I'm a bit worried about that. But
can you see it now in presentation?
Yeah. I think so.
Cool. So you can see in every bit of each topic, there's like a whole data team, basically, costing consumer behavior, and, you know, more recently, because of COVID and how we're having to sell, you know, innovation has been sort of digitally scaled up across the whole fashion chain, from design, merchandising, selling, sourcing and supplying to consumer engagement. Did it change slides, or is it still stuck on the?
No.
It hasn't. Okay, I'll go back to, can you see the slide now?
Yes.
Yes, okay. So because of data capture to increase efficiencies and productivity, you'd think it would also increase transparency. But because of the fashion cycle wanting to respond to consumers more and more quickly, you know, back in the day, traditionally it would take 9 months to order the fabrics for the designs and forecast, and, you know, and now it's more of a 9-week cycle. Things get subcontracted, which creates the most complex data system. When a design room, particularly for a big company, you know, if they don't have factories in-house, they decide, oh, we're going to create a red T-shirt for, you know, 9 weeks' time. It will just go out into the world, and someone will come back and say, yeah, we'll deliver. Which means that kind of grey area of how it's made allows for subcontracted and unregulated, you know, processes and labour practices. And we know this is the ugly side of fashion, and the consequence is huge. From, you know, 20% of industrial water pollution comes from treating and dyeing textiles. It's quite heavily publicised. So the only thing is, I mean, you know, in one of my projects I did was about plastic pollution, and actually fashion accounts for 20–35% of microplastic going into the ocean. But the consumers are demanding a change, which is the only thing that does incentivize the industry. And in 2019, Kering CEO Francois Henry Pinault, he actually spearheaded an industry-wide pact to achieve net zero emissions by 2050. And, you know, through things like repair, recycle, and circular economy and transparency. And I'm thinking, okay, I've heard this before, you know, will this happen? And I think there has been a definite shift. You probably saw earlier on in the year, Boohoo Group had a massive, you know, sales growth, 44%. Pre-tax profits compared to last year. And you're like, okay, so we're saying people are more ethical, yet one of the most fast fashion groups in the world during COVID, but maybe it's a perfect storm. People don't have money, but they want to, you know, spend it on something fun. But because their supply chains were exposed to be exploitative, they lost $1 billion in share prices because of public outcry, you know, in that week with the newspapers. So we can see that it does matter to the consumer, and the, you know, fashion is profit making, and they will respond to the consumer. So, you know, I think it's pretty hopeful. So the other area of backward attitude is diversity, and stats around this are quite difficult to find, but you can see in the media that usually you don't see, you know, I put Harry Styles there as being gender fluid, he's a big face, but also you don't see a lot of black faces you hadn't seen prior to this year. And there was quite an interesting hashtag challenge, the Vogue challenge. And I don't know if anyone saw it, but it was adopted by people of color particularly. And you can see that, you know, it came up with really beautiful imagery. You know, people photographed themselves, they styled it, they were the whole production team, and it kind of challenges what the idea of beauty is, the way it's sold to the world. The only thing I would say is it's still quite a particular club, because everyone there is still very beautiful. You know, there is, you know, beauty is still quite stereotypical, even if the color and the fluid, there's gender fluidity. So it's still quite an exclusive club. And this in itself has quite a lot of repercussions in associated social media like Instagram, because it creates dysmorphia, you know, self-esteem issues, and, you know, and trolling, and that's another subject in itself. So this beauty agenda the unattainable beauty agenda, has created these CGI multi-hyphenate influencer models. I mean, we know that of Michaela. And you know what? And then I was thinking, what keeps her alive? And you know, here's an article. She actually had a human boyfriend. It's kind of really mixing up the mixed realities. And it's the number of followers. This is the only reason she exists. It's the 2.7 million followers on Instagram. And if that data disappeared overnight, it wouldn't be relevant.
1 minute left.
I've got so much to say. Okay. Oh my goodness, where do I stop? Okay, here are some AI areas. I can't believe I talked so much that I don't even know what to say. And so deep fakes used in model making and personalization. I don't even know what to say in the next minute. So I've been looking a lot at wearables and touch as opposed to just the virtual body as well within my own projects, and mixing up realities. And just as a COVID landscape, you know, it's actually quite depressing for fashion going forward. All the reports say, you know, the industry, a lot of companies have gone under, but it's actually an area of massive innovation. And we are critiquing data a lot more because it's exposed, COVID has exposed a lot of misinformation, disinformation, and how, you know, we are being exploited as well. So I think this is going to, you know, the revolution has been sort of digitized, and it's a good thing.
Brilliant. That's a great place to stop. And you've tied all the threads together of data and fashion and COVID. Fantastic. So I want to open it up now to the rest of the panel, or from both sessions, to maybe have a conversation. It looks like we don't have any questions, but I'd really love for people to have a conversation about data and how it's materialized in these many different ways. So we've seen some really strong artworks. We've seen art and tech organizations doing things, engineers, art designers, people working in VR and healthcare. So we have just such a lovely range of work that we've seen today, but the thread really is data. So perhaps we can get someone to make a comment. I open it up to the panelists to make a comment or ask a question of each other. Anyone, please put up your hand if you want to say something, ask something. Sarah would like to say something. Go for it.
I guess the conversations that I've been having recently with people and that I'm curious to explore is, you know, when we are thinking about how data is used and managed and how we protect it, where does the, like, who is responsible here? You know, is it these large organizations like Facebook and Google? And obviously there is, you know, a lot of reliance on them. But when, for example, you are a company or a researcher, like there are some like industries and areas that are more regulated than others. But I think as we're moving more and more to, you know, commercial organizations using data, yeah, how do we create standards and create a space where the responsibility is distributed across everyone?
Great. Yeah. Anyone want to address that or say anything? I know Bushra has her hand up to say something as well, but if anyone wants to comment on what Sarah's just said. Or Bushra, carry on.
All I was going to say, sorry.
Go ahead.
You want me to speak? Okay. I think going back to what Jacob was saying as well, that despite the laws and regulations, it doesn't, and even the moral responsibility, it's really difficult to protect because it's so valuable as a source. But I think if sort of the end user is quite critical and much more protective about what information really means, I think that's the only way to have any sort of control.
Great, yeah. I think Paolo wanted to say something as well.
Yes, I have to say something since we are talking about regulations. I always hear about these two narratives that regulations are not enough or regulations are extremely needed. I think it's not black and white for sure, but definitely my experience of for what I saw, regulations were very central for improving real personal lives of many people. I mean, I saw it with the right to be forgotten. In Europe, we do have right to be forgotten, which is a heavy law, European law, and that really allows a lot of people to move on in their life or not be harassed online, something that in US is very dramatic, and that applies to all privacy situations, whatever is the kind of data from health or things that are harvested through any device. In US is a disaster, as you know, and that has very heavy implications. So that is a very practical example that regulations do work. On the other hand, it's true that in Europe we even have too many of those. And so, yes, it's probably something about our personal responsibility, but it's also about our agency. So how we can actually make those regulations and improve those regulations. In Europe, we have great regulations, but they are not that great either because we cannot really change them or make them more flexible sometimes. So that's my opinion.
Yeah. Does anyone else want to speak to that? Mike or Jacob, perhaps, since we're talking about regulations? Yeah, Mike, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting, and I think there's a lot of concern about privacy, and it's generated by a kind of fear that is often, and of course with COVID tracking and etc. It is a slightly scary thing in that the data practices are moving much faster than the kind of security and privacy issues in terms of their governance. And it's in many ways we're seeing the same kind of digital, same kind of problems manifest by the digital copyright work that was done kind of back in the end of the 90s, early kind of noughties, where the law and legislation just were not in sync and probably never can be. But I think there's also a sense of, with that fear that comes with these things, it's the generation of it's generated by a lack of understanding, and as Paolo said there, the agency that we have to deal with these things. More often than not, we don't actually know people don't actually know what they're protesting about. They just know they have a fear. So there's a sense, I think, that there's also though a kind of complete delegation of responsibility to data, and you can see that especially with COVID, where these mutant algorithms that have completely destroyed our education system in the UK. These were decisions that people made based on not taking a responsibility for the information that they had presented to them by these data sets. And so the politics of that, the agency of that, the literacy of that, these are all a kind of, that perfect storm that we're in right now. And I think agency is absolutely critical, and we generally do not take responsibility for agency either institutionally or individually.
So there's something interesting. so maybe we can go to Tiga. How can we take responsibility? Any thoughts, anyone? But we'll start with Tiga. How can we take responsibility for our data?
Well, I mean, I think the point being that I think we're sort of circling around here is that I feel like for the last decade or so, there's been this emphasis on the individual dealing with their privacy themselves, like, the raft of browser add-ons and these sort of individual interventions that we've sort of all been encouraged to take up. And like artists are totally responsible for like continuing this sort of idea that the protection and privacy should be happening on an individual level. And if we just get our apps in order, you know, everything will be fine. And I think that is completely misleading. And I think it's deeply problematic that a lot of large tech companies who are doing artist commissions and supporting this kind of work are continually wanting to support work that puts forward this as a solution. I think we need, you know, as we're talking about, like systemic change, regulation, like things that go beyond, like that protect everyone and aren't just about me having a particular type of literacy, so that I know, you know, what service to use and what not, or what behavior that I should be doing. You know, and that was the big take home for us with the New Organs project too, is that like, the funder of that project didn't really like it because they said it was too dark and that there wasn't a solution there. You know, there wasn't the sort of browser add-on tool that you could just like plug in and you're good to go. So yeah, I think that is a big tension in the sort of media art space still.
Thanks.
And just to jump onto that as well, I think it's really interesting in the like health and art space as well, because there's lots of different projects, including like ones I've worked with or people that I've seen exploring this space, where you could almost frame what you're developing as either an art project or a medical project, and it's kind of around the framing that you use, when still you're essentially delivering the same thing. And whilst there is potentially like much more opportunity for sustainability and almost becoming a medical startup, then there's a lot of anxiety about the regulation that does exist, and people are quite risk averse, and they're like, well, if I do gather that data, then I just don't even know how to do that. We're going to have to think about data protection, especially in emerging technologies. It's still totally the Wild West. And you've got investors that are like, well, gather the data and that's how you will, you know, will give you the money and be sustainable. But I think that, yeah, there are lots of people that are risk adverse, and sometimes I think that regulation can actually hinder people from doing the projects and things that they really want to do. And I think it's about creating clarity on how to do this in a safe way. And making sure that you can actually guide people through what does this process mean, like what are the best practices, and just creating that sort of mutual support.
Yeah, I think there's a tension between this idea of risk averse, which strangely to me seems to be actually all about risking the public's data, but not risking their bottom line. And doing something interesting to explore these ideas. Yes, Mike, go ahead.
I think fundamentally there's a lack of understanding by everybody, actually, by companies and institutes and people, about the value of data. And it's partly due to the fact that the institutions that, or the organizations, the companies that are actually monetizing data and the transactions that take place within the data context also don't know what the value is. This is a shift in terms of, you know, normally a value is established through some kind of hypothesis that this is, you know, this is something, I'm going to dig it up and, you know, piece of gold, I think you described that in the intro. Whereas in fact, people are dealing with data in such a way that without understanding the real value of it to anyone in particular, but they just have it and they can process it and they can analyze it and they can visualize it and monetize it. And it wasn't done with a hypothesis to start with. It was just done in response to, you know, the byproduct of actually dealing with it. So, and most transactions, cultural, you know, financial, social, are on the basis of a shared understanding of what value is in whatever the system that we're playing in, I think.
Bushra, you wanted to say something, yeah?
I think what I found is, you know, working with data within fashion, that things which are automated and it's quite clear cut, it increases efficiency. Fine. Bearing in mind, you know, data is not clean and it's certainly not neutral. We, you know, got many examples of that. Anything which is nuanced, which is like profiling or trying to create identity, particularly from data right now, unprecedented times, how will you machine learn and create strategies? we saw, you know, obviously we saw the mess with the GCSEs, and it wasn't the algorithm so much as the data in itself. You know, the data, the metadata. So this, like, the data is not the answer. It's an area which can increase efficiency and automation of things which we already know that works. But when you apply it in a different way, we don't really know if it works or not. And I see people not understanding that risk.
Sorry, we missed the last bit there. I want to put this to Joshua or Becky to kind of pick up on, perhaps.
I'm not
Or
sure
Josh-
I've got much to say on this particular topic, I'm afraid.
Okay, all right. Becky, what are your thoughts? Responsibility, ethics, how to use data, etc.
Yes, I'll try. Sorry, tech issues caused me to like not be able to catch everything that was just being discussed. I think there's the politics and the data literacy are, I think, two of the themes that I think I agree are really difficult to deal with. Kind of looking at the A levels and so on. Again, the algorithm design and its application weren't inherently the issues. It was that the people who chose to put those things in place were the issue. And there's no amount of citizen level data literacy that's going to improve that if the people who are at the top allowed to make these kinds of decisions that have the impacts are working within a larger power structure that kind of reinforces those decisions that they made. But then equally at the individual level and having individual responsibility as to protecting yourself and your data and your own privacy and how that data is treated. There's the complications of, do you have enough knowledge? Do the companies need to disclose enough information that you actually could make an informed decision about what you're doing and what happens to the things that you produce? And so that's where I think things like regulations do come in to be quite useful to kind of force the hand of larger corporations to do this. But then I understand the balance of smaller institutions then having, and organizations having difficulties navigating those very same regulations. So kind of looking at GDPR, while you're like, yes, I like GDPR and what it forces Google to do. However, if I'm a nonprofit running an arts organization, now I am terrified I am going to have a gigantic fine because I've done something that I don't understand how to treat, not in a nefarious way, but just because the system is not set up in a way that allows me as a different type of organization to make these decisions. So I think understanding, like so many things, power structures, and having that inform how we also put together regulations and how we handle data is really important as well.
So from artist/designer perspective, is there some kind of literacy that should happen both for artists but by artists, perhaps back to the community? So some kind of feedback loop maybe, but is there some kind of responsibility / ethical approach that artists and designers would take? Or what are I'm just throwing this out to any of you. What are your thoughts on that? What is the role of the artist and the designer in this equation? Not necessarily we've talked about the government, and we see that corporations are all kind of not really taking as much responsibility as they should unless they're forced to. But since we're part of, this is a STARTS event, we're talking about arts and design and working with technology and the role of technology and art using data. What are your thoughts on the responsibility and or role of the artists in this arena, I guess we can say? Anyone? Sarah would like to talk.
I think, to begin with, I think it's really important to make that distinguish between what is an artist and what is a designer. And I guess the thing that really resonated with me is this idea that I think artists are the people that ask those really difficult questions and can use their practice as a way of really challenging what data is and how it's used. And, you know, I've seen exhibitions where we've had, you know, our faces scanned and sort of reconfigured, and then they're like, oh, by the way, we're giving you no choice. We are just keeping your data and we will be using it in future installations. And there is that feeling of just like, well, I didn't consent to this. Is this, you know, illegal? Or, you know, is this what art is? Rather than, I feel like a designer is someone that is making information more accessible and thinking about how we can redesign, for example, terms and conditions, and how we can make it clearer what information like we are actually giving away, because no one's reading those like 71-page forms in, you know, size 8 Times New Roman font. So I think, you know, there's different roles here. First of all, making that information more accessible, but just making those conversations and questions as well, you know, creating a space for that.
That's interesting. Yeah. Anyone else? Yes, Josh.
I guess I feel like I agree with you about the difference between artists and designers. But I think maybe the artist's role is to try and be sensitive to the poetics of what's going on, and to try to understand how these things, how data, for instance, is accumulating meaning to people, because it kind of is. I mean, I have a very this sort of COVID stuff. I have a very personal experience of this, because this whole situation has kind of radicalized some people who are very close to me, and they've become anti-vaxxers, and that's sort of metastasized into becoming climate change deniers and things like that, because they're basically, because there's a kind of the distrust and the kind of meaning that's accrued around data and around science and all of these kind of sciencey things now to them has become kind of agglomerated into this sort of what they see as a sort of authoritarian kind of slide that society is taking, which I don't feel is, you know, the two things are not necessarily connected, but they've become kind of poetically connected. They rhyme with each other. You know, I don't feel the authoritarian slide of society is necessarily to do with data per se, but and science definitely. But
and how does the artist fit into that picture then? Are they, which side are they on in the mind of your friends or peers?
Well, I think, you know, I think the artist is in charge of trying to influence culture rather than you know, and trying to kind of interpret and intervene in how these signs, the interplay of all these signs, and something has gone wrong somewhere, because I don't think artists clearly are doing their. I think something has gone wrong in how we have thus far kind of interpreted this stuff. I think the Most Blue Skies project we did, for instance, was kind of about, in some ways, trying to reevaluate the idea of science and quantification of our experience, which in some ways is kind of threatening. And I understand the threat that life is being quantified into information, but it was trying and find a poetry in that, and maybe that's, you know, something that we have to try and do.
Yeah, interesting. So anyone want to respond or add to that, or put your 2 cents in? Bushra, yeah.
I think that the words, particularly the government, have used to demonize data and science as well. You know, the mutant algorithm, it sort of reinforces this Western culture of just like robots, the dystopia of it all. And so I think for the artists, we need to sort of address, well, how do we make it, how do we engage with something as dry and political? And I mean, we always say about statistics and damn lies, that goes back, so far, and it relates again to this theory of, if we quantify, then it can be misused. So I think, I don't know, can the artists make it cuddly and, make data a friend for us, and how we kind of use it for what it's, properly and impactfully.
Yeah, and it's been demonized on both sides of the political spectrum on some level. So yeah, where does it go from here? Anyone else want to respond to that? Paolo or Tiga, do you want to respond at all?
Well, yes, I think artists should be responsible in a way too. Although, yes, I mean, we can use art and so be more provocative and push the boundaries a little bit more. But I am also deeply convinced that since we use this such material that's so powerful and is so relevant, and we understand it deeply, we also have a responsibility to come up with something else that is beyond just representation or showing something. I mean, this is not like making a painting or making a funny sculpture. It's also something else. So since we know these materials so well, we have this privilege, maybe, why not coming up with something else? For instance, it was very correct, I don't remember who said that the GPDR is too complex for artists, which is true, and I totally agree. But why not coming up with some exceptions for artists concerning GDPR? For instance, just saying. But that's really the difference we should make when we talk about media art, because otherwise I think it's great to produce a piece, but what next? What is the agency we can have with that piece? That's my opinion. That's it.
Thank you, Paolo. We have Tiga and then Sarah. So if you'd like to go ahead, Tiga.
Sure. Yeah, I think these are all good points, in that I do think we have responsibility as artists not to just reproduce these systems of oppression. For example, the artwork that does facial recognition on you. I think there's a lot of projects out there like that, right? That I've heard Alison Birch, a friend of mine here, calls this cop art, right? Where we just reproduce these surveillance systems in a performative way under the umbrella of critique. And I think we really need to move beyond that. I think we need to, as Paolo's saying, open up new imaginations for other logics in the world, other ways we can make decisions. Although data is powerful, it's also really stupid, right? Anyone who used a Fitbit, it doesn't work half the time, right? So there's also, a limitation to what data can produce, the very partial, very narrow perspective of the world that it shows you. And using apps and these systems, we know that as a lived experience, it's very clear. And so I think we have a role to point that out. But I think there's also a lot of nuance here too, right? Because there's a lot of artworks that, and we've all participated in them, we've all made them, where we point out these flaws in data-driven systems, and basically are doing a sort of free R&D for Facebook, for Fitbit, for these big tech companies, and pointing out, the problems that exist. And then, in version 2, 3, they create these patches, they address it, and, the logic continues. There isn't sort of an alternative happening. So I think, in the media arts, we need to sort of pay attention to the other ways that decisions are made and other ways that responsibilities are taken. And it's not all just, these data-driven things. I think this has come up a bit now, right? That I think often data is used as an excuse for people just to go and make the same old political decisions that they would have made anyway, right? And I think we also see this in activism, right? We'll go and collect the data about climate change rather than actually just doing the difficult social work we need to do to create that change, right? And yeah, so I think it is very nuanced, and I do think, we have made a lot of sort of errors or naive mistakes in the media arts that we need to sort of move up beyond.
Brilliant. Yeah, really, really good points. Sarah, you wanted to say something further?
Yeah, I guess I feel like it's important to make a distinction between the people that are enthusiastically collecting data because that is aligned with their practice and what they're doing, and the people that are kind of begrudgingly having to do it. And I think that there are lots of, artists, for example, that just want to make art about, I don't know, unicorns and books, like who knows? And there's like this natural part of just like running events or doing things online where, there is just a part that you just have to, use data for whatever reason. And that can be anything from just like gathering emails for your newsletter to, much more involved interactive experiences. And I guess like the real problem here is that like, it's not sexy to everyone and not everybody even wants to learn about it, but this is really, really important, and it is people's like personal information, whatever that is. And I just think like the way we're not taught to manage our finances in school and how to communicate in relationships, like this is kind of vital to our existence now as humans. And I think we really need to consider how we make this more interesting and appealing to people, and how, for example, we can use the arts to start, like engaging people in these experiences. But I think just, educating people in more compelling ways is really needed.
So we find artists as educators more than artists, perhaps? Yes, Josh, you want to comment? Come in.
Yeah, I've got to say I kind of find myself bristling at the idea of artists as educators. I feel like we're probably maybe a better way of talking about what artists do is that they, I feel like the way that we're all talking about this is evidence of the fact that there isn't much language around what we're talking about yet. We don't have a way of talking about these things very well. And one of the things that artists do maybe is come up with languages, metaphors. We come up with ways for people to talk about things. We come up with the metaphors. And I guess that's what I was meaning. Maybe I was not being very, not talking very well about the poetics of things. We come up with the metaphors and language that people can use to actually address ideas in their heads. Sorry, I'm going to stop talking now. But
all right, I get what you're saying, though. The communicators, yeah. Sometimes the words aren't the modality of communication. So communicators, maybe not educators, but as part of that, finding ways to reach out to the community to try to make sense of the world we're in at the moment. And I think it's interesting that you say that COVID has changed the way people are responding to issues around viruses, climate change, politicians. All of these things are being kind of lumped in, and scientists, of course, being lumped into the same kind of pot of, I don't know, evil. Maybe I'm paranoid, but it feels to me a little bit like Mao's time of communists to get rid of the intellectuals and the scientists and bring it back down to the people. I might be wrong, but we do feel like in a funny place in society at the moment, and data is both the problem and the solution, and yet, like you say, we need a better language. We need to find a way to communicate these concerns and issues, and maybe pull them apart from some of these other concerns that people have. I think we're running lower on time. Is there any thoughts on where we go from here? Because I feel like this is a turning point in maybe in civilization, I don't know, but any thoughts on that? Anyone? Yeah, Josh?
Well, I think we're talking about data a lot, and data is maybe slightly the wrong thing to be focusing on. Because, I mean, someone mentioned algorithms early on, and the word algorithms is a weirdly misused word, and it's just a sort of pejoratively used word now. But the algorithms we really generally need to worry about are the ones that aren't written in code, because the ones that are in code you can at least look at. The ones that are kind of underlying in society that are invisible are much more pervasive and difficult to come to grips with. And the fact that algorithms are politics now and vice versa, you know, the fact that society is being organized by data and by algorithms, and that the people that I know have kind of gone down the rabbit holes they've gone down because of silly things like YouTube recommendation algorithms, you know, that's something that we need to talk about, and things that need to be talked about as what they are, as politics, and as things that are in the public domain, as political things, and not as you know, just implementation details of someone's thing. And what they are really is manifestations of capitalism, and that kind of is what needs to be kind of addressed more explicitly.
Thank you. Bushra, you wanted to speak?
Just a quick agreement. When we were in sustainable fashion and we just saw how things were changing, and we found that one of the biggest problems was the word green, that there was a disparate idea of what it meant. So we decided as a consultancy to create a lexicon, just a tiny, you know, little leaflet going through all the words that were being bandied around and what that meant in context of the consumer and, you know, to say the designer, and gave them out at trade shows. Because we felt it was like one of the people just didn't understand. And when people can't engage, like they literally were sort of, okay, it's not important to me, or I'll just, you know, I'll just be fearful of it. And so I think that they would be, yeah, really interesting to have like a common language or a communication, which was for the user, so part design, but really interesting ways about data. I think it would be very empowering for society.
I mean, maybe there can be something that might be a challenge to put out there for artists and designers, maybe to work together with technologists around this idea of coming up with a common language. I feel like it's similar to this idea of the scientists who signed an agreement not to make robotics that harm or something. Maybe there can be some kind of, you know, global artist project to come up with a language around data and how to separate it from the politics. I don't know, just a thought. Any last thoughts before we tie up this panel? It's been a really interesting and brilliant panel. Thank you, everyone. Is there any last thoughts to close up before we end this session? Anyone? I think we lost Jacob somehow in the way. But any last thoughts? Anyone? Going once, going twice. Fantastic. Thank you all. You're a brilliant panel, and it's been really exciting. We're going to make sure that it's not only streamed out live, but it's recorded. And so we'll make sure that we make it available to you to share in your networks, to put it back on the Ars Electronica and Start's socials. And yeah, thank you so much. Brilliant. Out for me. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.